Welcome back, everybody. Just pulling out of a rest area here, and I thought I'd do kind of sort of a quick little video before we leave here too. I want to move my cellular device. The video idea that I want to try with you guys is I'm considering doing some stuff for some of the newer drivers. Some advice that I was given last week was find a niche within a niche. So, obviously my niche is already trucking. It's already a niche. And I think that I can speak as a younger guy, as a younger driver, I can speak to the younger crowd a little bit when it comes to, discussing, being a new driver within the industry or just new to the industry in general. You don't necessarily have to be new or new as an age, because you can be 55 and decide that you want to hop into a truck and start driving. Nothing wrong with that. If anything, I'm all here for that one. It's a great line of work. I love it. I wouldn't want to do anything different. So that being said, I want to talk about 5 things that I hate about trucking. Now, this could change from being a company driver versus being owner-op. Let's just say that, because as a new driver, most new drivers start off as company drivers. So we'll do 5 things I hate about 5 things I hate about trucking. Number 1, and I think this is pretty obvious. Being gone. Obviously, that seems like, it might seem like counterintuitive, because you're already, you're gone for a long period of time. Like, it's what you signed up for. Sure. Do I love it? Yeah, I still love it. But that's not to say that it doesn't come with its own set of struggles. I love what I do, but there are definitely times where I get home and I just go, I wish I had more time. Number 2, the delays. Definitely delays. Now, delays can range anywhere from, we'll say, anything from waiting at a dock to traffic. Waiting at a dock is, in this, I guess these two kind of go together with the first one. So if I'm trying to get home at a decent time, right? The waiting in a dock will eat up your home time on, say, a Friday. On top of that, if you want to make money, the way that you obviously need to make the money is driving. So the more time you sit at a dock, less, you're using up all that extra time that you could have been driving. If you're stuck at a dock, if you're stuck somewhere for 7 hours, call it your average unloading time is 1 hour and 45, 2 hours. That's 5 hours you could have been driving. At 60 miles an hour, that's 300 miles that you could have done. Now, granted, yes, you get paid for that time, but still, if you're If the wheels ain't turning, you ain't earning. Delays, number one. Or, not number one. That's number two. And these aren't in any particular order. Number three, the cost to get started. This is not a persistent thing, obviously. You know what? Number three, we'll call it the startup cost and maintenance cost. Now, startup costs. You know, you got your school, you got that type of stuff, right? Easy enough. Well, but then you finish your school and you get a job. Now what are you looking at buying? What's it going to take for you to get started? Well, you're going to need some phone mounts, and if you buy a phone mount like what I'm using for my phone up on my dash, which is a Bracketron all-steel mount, you know, that's I think they're $60. You know, but you want to buy quality stuff. You know, you don't necessarily want to have some cheap piece of plastic that, you know, that you're going to end up replacing every 4 months. My Bracketron, I know for a fact, is going to last me a heck of a long time. I actually have 2 arms for it because the first one I had bought, the base broke again on it. So this one just sits exactly where it's at. But if I wanted to move it, I could stick it all over, all sorts of different places inside the truck. Now, phone mount, and then you get your GPS. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can work a GPS. You can run an iPad with cellular, but now you've got your cellular cost to, you know, obviously make sure that you can run your GPS on it. Do a bunch of other stuff rather than having to use your hotspot, like what I've had to do sometimes. And then for maintenance, we'll stay on the topic of startup. You're going to buy a CB radio. Depending on what you buy. You can buy a Cobra 29, they're about $140. Me personally, I like my Uniden. I do. But if I was going to replace it with anything, I'd probably be buying a Striker. Those are $500. And also call it $150 for mounts, and then about $1,000 for a GPS system. Well, that's a Garmin, Rand McNally, or an iPad. And then you've got anywhere between $130 to $500 for a CB radio. Those are the basic necessities that you'll need. Now, the maintenance portion of that comes down to when your GPS decides that, when it's outdated and and you're ready for that next step in technology. That next step is going to cost you. And it could cost you a pretty penny. I mean, if you think that the way that I think most of us like to look at it is a GPS will last you anywhere between 3 to 4 years before it's about time for you to upgrade it, because the technology is that much better and that much faster. It doesn't lag behind as much. That's where an iPad is really nice, because you don't have to replace it every 2 or 3 years. iPad, you just keep updating it, just make sure you get the right one to begin with, and you're kind of off to the races. So it's a much heftier startup cost, I think, on an iPad, but it'll last you longer. And number 3, third thing I hate about trucking is the lack of parking. I think within the industry there is a crisis, and it's a serious crisis. We have too many trucks, not enough parking spaces. And, you've got your ELDs, your electronic logbook. And those will limit you to how much you can drive. So if you've got 250,000 trucks starting up at 8 a.m. and you're one of them, and say you're going to work a 14-hour day, well, now you're ending at 10 p.m., which means anywhere between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., there's 250,000 trucks out there looking for parking spaces. There's never enough on the side of the, on the freeway. There's never enough at the rest areas. Pilots are awfully small. TAs and Petros typically tend to be pretty big. But you're not going to go to a TA or a Petro if you have an account with Love or with Pilot. You could park there, but then you're not going to get your shower there, not unless you want to pay $14. And frankly, parking on the side of the freeway, it's super illegal. I've done that a couple of times. I've had to park on an on-ramp or an off-ramp and spend the night. I don't like doing that because a lot of truckers have died doing that. Somebody gets too sleepy behind the wheel and they doze off and, pile drive into a semi that's parked on the shoulder. Parking is always my biggest. I would say that out of the 5, if I had to pick my biggest, the one thing I hate the absolute most, it's that there's never enough parking. And I don't think unless some legislation was passed, if the DOT or the FMCSA or these other third-party companies, Love's, Pilot, whatever, unless they got some massive federal grants to expand and build larger truck stops, then it's always going to be a problem. And of course, the argument that I've heard is, well, just park at a Walmart. Well, not every Walmart likes us. And you can go all over online, and Walmart will boot your truck, and they'll put a what do they call them? I think they call them barnacle. So it's basically a boot, but for your windshield, and it's just this massive metal plate that suction cups to your windshield. So now you can't drive. So you get a boot on your truck, and then you can't do that, or then you can't see anything out of your truck. So I don't like staying at Walmart's. I try not to stay at Meijer unless I have a delivery there. Meijer is typically a bit more lenient in some cases, but I would say that a lot of that also comes down to your route planning. Figuring out when you're going to start up, and then figuring out when you're going to stop. That's all fine. So, yes, number 3, lack of parking. Number 4 is, this will kind of go back to technology a little bit. The accuracy with GPSs. Now, you could use a road map, fine, and the argument can be made, well, I'll just use Google Maps or Apple Maps. Good luck. Because these trucking GPSs are specifically tailored for your size of truck. It keeps you from, cutting your truck in half with a bridge. It's supposed to keep you from going down any roads that are no truck routes. Your phone operates off of a Mazda Miata, we'll call it. A tiny little thing. It doesn't account for 53 feet of trailer and then another 10, 12 feet of truck. That's why having a trucking GPS is very important and highly recommended. Yes, there are a couple of apps out there that do better, but a lot of them are still the same. Certain GPSs have better tools to help me decide which path I want to take, but the accuracy on them is not fantastic. It's really not. They freak out every so often. They don't give you that pinpoint accuracy that phones do. It'll give you a general area, and sometimes when I punch in an address on my GPS, the place won't even show up. It doesn't exist. And sometimes that's because it's under a completely different city name. Where if I look it up in my phone, and boom, we get that stuff almost instantaneously. Unless it's a building that's in the progress, or that's in the process of being built. There are plenty of times where the GPSs just won't even pick up an address. So then you sit there for 15, 20 minutes and try to figure out, how am I going to get to the spot? And you got to find the local areas, or you got to hunt it down on your GPS. I mean, I've sat there for 20 minutes and dragged the map around, found the nearest cross section or the nearest intersection, measured it out, went, okay, that's about blah, 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 2 miles, boop, and then you drop a point, but it still takes you 25 minutes to do it. It's time consuming. I don't understand why, for the money that we pay for them, that they're not great. So, number 5. And I really had to fish for this one. I would say that my 5th thing that I hate about trucking is the lack of human connection. And, we've all got, once you start driving, everybody's got a headset. Everybody's got one. And you can chat on the phone all day. But it's still, as humans, we crave that face-to-face interaction. We crave it. It's part of who we are as humans. And if you ever talk to a trucker, whether they're young or old, after a little while, you might laugh because you're like, dang, this guy or girl just never shuts up. It's because we don't get a lot of chance to actually talk. And I found that doing YouTube actually helps me with that a little bit. It gives me that, it scratches the itch of needing to say something to somebody. But you don't get to go home every night. Not unless you do daytime work, drive for the day, go home, drive for the day, go home. But that's also not where the money's at. So, a lot of us typically tend to do the overnights, going to East Coast, West Coast, Texas, whatever. Because that is how you make the money. The more miles you do, the more money you make. So, it's a very hard thing to explain. I love human interaction. I love interacting with people. People are fascinating to me. And so there's always that little bit of, you see people out in the store, you're out walking around and interacting with everybody, and it becomes very hard sometimes to see that, because you're like, well, dang, I wish I could go home, on a Wednesday, go out, grab a burger with the boys, or what have you. But rather than ending that particular sentiment on a negative note, I'll say this. It makes the time that you have with people that much more valuable. When you're working in your office day in and day out, a lot of us, I'm sure, talk about how much, oh, you know, I hate this coworker, I hate talking to him. Don't take it for granted. You know, yeah, you know, I signed up for this, and I love it. It puts things into perspective for you. Yeah, I don't get to have that you know, that face-to-face interaction with people. You know, except for, you know, a couple days throughout the week. But it makes that time that much more precious and that much more important, that you make the most of what you have. And I think that's the best way to finish this off. I'll also be posting a list of, you know, the 5 things I love as well. I think that'll be important. You know, right? I've never been a big fan of the 5 things I hate. Well, you know, but I'll be posting that one up, I think, fairly soon. I'll film it right after this one, and yeah, if anybody has any questions, or, you know, let me know down in the comments, like, what things that do you absolutely hate about trucking. And I'm kind of curious to see how many people, or how many of us actually agree on, like, the exact same thing, because these are just my opinions. You know, you could talk to 100 other drivers, and theirs might be different. But with that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one.